your experience. I think that just moving on, maybe I'd ask Acha to give a summary of what's going on in the world today. There are two reports, one on Nigeria, one on Africa, with respect to COVID-19 and post-COVID-19. So if you can help share two reports, independent reports, and you co-authored both reports, give a summary of what your thoughts are. And I know you had some slides. I don't know if the slides are still available, to just talk us through what your thoughts are with what's going on. Acha is in South Africa, so let's get the view of, and does a lot of work in Nigeria and across Africa, and sits on the committee with the AU. So he's able to tell us what's going on in Africa and what will be happening post the pandemic.
Thanks first to both of you for the invitation. I actually decided not to do slides, so maybe just have a bit of an update around, it's more the economic impact of the virus on Africa, but also what that means for many of the people on the line, right? I understand it's more sort of SMEs. And the reality is today we have about 15,000 cases across Africa. If you look at the last count, we're trending a bit, actually quite below Europe. And there's big debates as to why we're trending below Europe. Is it the BCG vaccine? Is it because we have a young population? Is it because of humidity and or is it that we're just not testing enough, right? I think nobody really knows, but the truth is we're not testing enough. That's very clear. If you look at, give you a sense, last I looked a few days ago, Nigeria had done probably less than 3,000 tests. South Africa had done, 63,000, right? So we're definitely not testing enough. It's something we need to increase significantly. But anyhow, but that's where we are now. The impact, and we ran a bunch of scenarios around what this could look like, starting with looking at what's happening globally and the impact on Africa. And the truth is we're facing three crises. We have the global corona crisis, and that gets impacted really by the supply chains, and maybe some of you have figured it out, supply chains disruptions. If you're importing some fabric from China, if you're importing something from Italy, that's definitely affected. It's also get affected by the global demand. So if you're exporting to these markets or to Europe, that gets it, but that's a global issue. The local after pandemic, that's the restrictions on travel, right? So none of us can travel. And so tourism is hit big time, hotels, restaurants, all the sectors. And then also ways of working, right? A number of people are just, you can't move anymore. And so you can't make money, you can't earn a living, you can't spend as much. And so that has got it impacted quite significantly, right? And I'll come back to that, household expenditures. And the third is oil. So oil is impacting, of course, places like Nigeria or Angola. But it's a positive impact for countries that are importers of oil. So there's three drivers. Now, the output of all of this is there's only one scenario, and the scenario where things get under control in Europe, they're able to control in Europe and the US, and Africa also can contain it. Under that scenario, we think Africa as a whole is going to experience a growth of probably 0.4%, a minimal growth, but at least positive. Under any other scenario, it'll be a recession across Africa. Right, so that's the continent. In Nigeria, we believe that any under scenario, Nigeria is going to go into recession this year, unfortunately, right? We think, GDP growth could be minus 2, minus 3% in the best case, right? It could even get much worse than that, depending on how long this lasts. So there's a big impact, right? So that's on the economics. On jobs, we've also quantified jobs, and that report is actually coming out tomorrow. Just to give you a sense, today, there are 450 million jobs in Africa. About 150 million are in the formal sector and 300 million in the informal sector. Of that 150 million, we project that about 15 to 20 million people are actually going to lose jobs out of the 150. We think another 30 million or so are going to have the salaries reduced because people are going to say, instead of firing people, let's try to figure out how we can reduce salaries. So about a third of the formal jobs will be affected. On the informal jobs, we also think a third, about 100 million or the 300 million will be affected. So it's a massive, massive crisis on the continent, right? So I'll just end and then we can, I'm sure, go into Q&A, but what does that mean for SMEs? And the reality is, I think we think of it as the large corporations, there's the SMEs, and there's just the individuals, right? And the people who will be the most affected from a company perspective, the SMEs, right? That's 40% of the jobs. Depending on how you count it, they'll be the most affected because they don't have the financial capacity to sustain this, right? Large companies have some money they saved and they can cut back on capex. SMEs are the most vulnerable. And so we've seen some programs come into place. There've been some programs that were announced in Nigeria, but we think none of these programs are big enough, right? You know, our countries have announced as fiscal stimulus packages roughly is about 1 to 3% of GDP, and what we need is more like 9 or 10%. So there's a big gap there, right? And so we've got to figure out how we close that gap, and a lot of that gap has to go to support SMEs, but also support the most vulnerable people in the population, right? So make sure they can continue to live in the midst of this crisis. Let me just stop there. Hopefully it's giving you a bit of a sense for what's happening.
It has, and it doesn't sound, at the moment, it doesn't, the picture is not looking great. But hey, we'll discuss all that. Ijeoma, what's going on in New York? What's going on with business, the online business? What are your thoughts as well with testing, with the pandemic and hopefully post-pandemic?
I'd like to start off by saying thank you to the both of you for inviting me to this. I think, you know, this is an amazing way to reach out to people and just share what we're experiencing from different parts of the world. So we've got representation from Joburg, New York, and Nigeria in this panel. So I'm really grateful for that. So as you know, New York has been in the headlines since the outbreak of the pandemic occurred in the US. So New York is the epicenter of what's really going on in the US. And the stats are not great. There have been a lot of fatalities as a result of this virus. And the biggest challenge that we're facing here as a society is the fact that we're in a highly populated part of the world, highly populated state, and as a result, quarantining is very essential. And quarantining would help us prevent the spread of this virus. But what we're finding is that as much as we're quarantining, we're still not even testing enough. So Acha mentioned the stats in Africa and in Nigeria specifically around the number of tests that are occurring. In New York as well, the tests are not happening as fast as they are. And with the fact that a lot of people may carry the virus and are asymptomatic, we just don't know the path this virus is moving. So it becomes harder. So right now, New York is facing a crisis around its healthcare workers. Hospitals are stretched. We're facing challenges with small businesses. And I want to expand on that a little bit more because small businesses are the ones bearing the brunt of this pandemic. The larger businesses have the financial capacity to be able to weather the headwinds. But the smaller businesses typically don't maintain that level of cash flow. At times, you know, they have cash flow that would see them for a quarter or 2 quarters at max. So what then happens? So we're seeing a spike as a result in unemployment claims. People are being laid off just because there's no cash flow to sustain employees. There's no cash flow to keep the lights on. There's no cash flow to pay your rent. So it's a huge challenge. You know, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. So I don't want this to be all doom and gloom. I believe there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and I will talk about it in more detail. But you know, the healthcare workers here are facing a lot of challenges right now in New York, and a lot of institutions are beginning to step up to help the healthcare system, either providing PPEs or, you know, turning their production facilities into manufacturing plants for hospital equipments. So those positives are rolling through, and I'm hoping with time, as we extend the social distancing, we begin to see a proper flattening of the curve and fewer deaths, and the capacity in the hospitals begin to reduce, or at least come down a little bit to the point that it's manageable for the healthcare workers. But you know, right now we're waiting to see how this plays out.
Thank you. Thank you. Sanyade, you're in Lagos, in Nigeria. Yesterday, our president extended the lockdown, even though Acha doesn't think that we are implementing or we are abiding by the lockdown. It was 2 weeks before that, further extended by another 2 weeks, and some of us had done about 4 weeks before that. So what are your thoughts before we then move on to, what are your thoughts on what's going on with this extra 2 weeks, the extension, and the impact?
Okay. Well, again, I too will say thank you for having me on. In terms of the extra 2 weeks, the reality is both Acha and Ijeoma have said, we all know deep down we're not testing enough. And the reality is, you know, Nigeria, we're saying what we think our numbers are, But when you compare our tested numbers versus not just South Africa, even a country like Ghana, who have tested so much more, we kind of, there's a chance that there's some kind of false sense of security with the Nigerian, the number of cases we say we have. But having said that, we are where we are. There is the virus, it's going around. Should we lock down? I don't know. Different schools of thought. I'm not a public health expert. There is the question of whether or not we could have really sought to implement an approach that is cognizant of the environment in which we're operating in that most of the people are in informal employment. They're reliant on a day-to-day, daily bread, literally. And so when we shut down like this, it has significant implications. But my president has spoken. We're at home for 2 weeks, and we all have to see how we can make the best of the situation we find ourselves.
Thank you.
So back to the impact of all of this, I don't want to call it gloom and doom, but how does this impact us? Acha's told us, what our reality is and what we should be looking at in terms of jobs and how jobs will be affected. And Ijeoma, you told us that there's light at the tunnel. So I'm very tempted to skip, the second part and just go straight to, do you think there are any opportunities this season? Where is the light? The proverbial light at the end of the tunnel. I know that, for me, this week, I realized that hope is something, not that I didn't know, but it was reinforced, that hope is something, it's a conscious decision, staying hopeful. So, but how do we balance reality with this need for us to be hope dealers, to be able to share with the world that, listen, let's just hang in tight and maybe we'll be able to weather the storm. Where's this light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, I think I'll start by saying, let's not panic. This is a time for us to keep calm, because in a stressful situation like this, it's very easy for fear and anxiety to come in. More than ever, we need to be able to take a step back and just assess what we're doing. What is it about our business right now that is working for us and what's not working? Is this a time for us to pivot? And you have to be willing to ask yourself those hard questions. If you're going to pivot, what would pivot look like? Now is a time to lean into your community to better understand how you can essentially ensure that you're pivoting in a direction that's sustainable. So, as I said, start with not panicking, take that step back and assess. Then, as a small business owner, you have to look at your cash flow and understand, okay, what's the next 3-4 months going to look like for me? I have staff. I have utilities to pay. Where am I going to get that income to pay my bills? Looking at that, some tough conversations need to be had. Reaching out to your suppliers to see if they already have certain things in place where they can extend credit for you or extend your cash flow so you don't have to pay everything up front. You're going to have hard conversations with your employees because you want to keep your resources. You want to keep the talent that you currently have and ensure that they're still around with you when this headwind passes. So having conversations with your staff to just let them know what the challenges are, be open and honest about it, and see if there's a way one could potentially delay certain payments. I do understand that in an economy like Nigeria and other African nations where it's harder for people to forgo salaries because a lot of people are not earning, good wages. A lot of people are below the minimum wage line. That's a harder conversation to have. But nonetheless, one should have that conversation. And after looking at your cash flow and trying to understand where you're going to pivot, also look for opportunities. So Acha mentioned that there might be some government programs that could help, but not to the extent that would help really ease the burden. But what some people don't realize is that you could also seek opportunities in other markets as well. So the UK government is also offering opportunities for small business owners. The US market is also offering opportunities for small business owners. So if your business is one of those that is global, then it allows you to tap into those markets. Do that, stay informed, understand what assistance is available to you. Then you have the banks. They have a social responsibility to the business community to at least help small businesses. Small businesses drive the economy. Without them, pretty much a lot of economies will be stagnant. So it's very important that the banks now more than ever also look for ways to help the small business community. So speak to your banking contacts, your financial advisors, and see what opportunities exist for you. And I'll round up by saying also, don't look at this as an opportunity to reduce your bottom line, because it's very quick to go there. People are very quick to go there and say, okay, I need to preserve money. Let me cut my bottom line. Instead, look at ways that you could, just reframe the problem that you're facing. So if you have employees that you want to keep, use this as an opportunity to upskill your staff. So previously, if you had somebody doing sales and a different person doing marketing, why can't the salesperson help with the marketing as well? Teach them those skills and help them do something different. Look for way people can plug into different roles in your organization. Easier said than done. So this is not a magic pill for everybody. It's going to vary on the business size, the business model, the individual. But with every challenge is always a framework for opportunity to be found.
And if I may just add on, Ijeoma, because I fully agree with you. I just remembered one of my clients, I don't know how it was in Nigeria. In South Africa, when they announced the lockdown, everybody went and hoarded on toilet paper. That's what people wanted, right? So you cannot buy any toilet paper in South Africa. The equivalent of toilet paper for businesses is cash, right? So you need to hold on to your cash as much as possible. So again, to Ijeoma's point, you need to figure out how much cash you have, run it under different scenarios to understand when you might run out of cash. I mean, you need to be very clear on that and figure out how you can preserve cash. Second thing I was going to add is a bit what you said around, then look at all the different programs. Banks have programs, the central bank has done some programs to support SMEs, and make sure you can apply for them, right? Make sure you apply for these programs so you have access to it. The third on opportunities, I fully agree with you. Like somebody said, we should never waste a good crisis, right? Within this, by the way, there's still businesses that are actually growing, right? So I was thinking about some of the SMEs that were, producing, manufacturing. Can they pivot to manufacturing masks, right? So we're going to need billions and billions of masks around the world, right? So we've seen SMEs in Kenya starting to do that, right? So they were shifting. Sorry?
And Nigeria.
And Nigeria as well. Perfect. Good. So manufacturing masks. We're seeing a lot of opportunities in the healthcare sector, as you can imagine, right? We're seeing a lot of opportunities in the digital space. So everybody says, look, people are starting to realize that we need to digitize, right? Whether it's governments, businesses. So if you can play in that space, or pivot your business model to play in that space. So just don't think on how this crisis is going to affect you only. Reflect on what opportunities could be created. How are we going to act very differently coming out of this crisis? And how can you help play a role in that space?
And so Eddie, I'm quite, this question, please, I mean, this is not my terrain, but I would really love to know, do you think any investor would be looking to invest in any business this season? Or do you think everyone is going to have the same approach, like, let's hold on to our cash and just watch the market for now and see what happens in 6 months or a year from now?
I think it really depends. First of all, when we say this season, I think one of the things is we don't even know how long this season is going to last. We don't know how long we're going to be at home. Like, if I speak for Nigeria, we now only as of last night had certainty that we were at home for another 2 weeks, but we don't actually know what happens thereafter. So in times where there's such heightened uncertainty, investors are likely to hold on to their money because they really don't know what the world's going to look like. But then fast forward a few months, as Acha and Ijeoma have said, there will be opportunities. There's no question about that. So if for investors who do have money, for example, like private equity investors who've already raised their funds and they're essentially sitting on this money, which is almost like burning a hole in their pocket, because if they don't spend it, it affects their returns. They're going to be looking for transactions. They're going to be looking for the right transactions. Some high net worth individuals as well, the savvy ones, they will realize actually, for example, the tech space, everybody is going to be looking at stuff in the tech space. And I personally, we'll talk about it a bit later, but I think also in the creative sector, there are going to be a lot of opportunities.
Interesting. What this means, It's today, I realize that there's still a lot of commerce going on. There's so much commerce going on with the lockdown. So there are opportunities.
Well, life goes on. The other day, I was just going to go for a walk, and outside my gate, I saw a guy with a van, all sorts of fruit and vegetables, and the obligatory goat lying on top of the fruit and vegetables. And I'm asking, do you deliver? He said yes. So I took his number. That was my hookup. And on Saturday, I had my delivery. So people are looking at where the opportunities are, because in every challenge, it's said that if you've got a solution mindset, you just think, okay, to this new problem, what solution can I offer? And people always pay for solutions.
Cool.
If you look,
sorry, go.
No, I was just going to say, if you look at New York, everyone knows that New York has one of the best food scene in the world, arguably. And, it's all about takeouts. It's all about finding that nice restaurant that you enjoy the meal and you ensure that you have access to it. So with what's going on now, a lot of small businesses that are running restaurants have pivoted to the online platform. So you have apps like DoorDash, you have apps like Seamless, who now make it easier to onboard these restaurants and put them as part of their delivery system as well. So as much as we're in isolation, we're still able in some ways to get access to some of the things we love, i.e. the types of food that we enjoy eating. So companies have pivoted slightly in that direction to just enable society at large, because essentially food is an essential service for everybody. People need to eat, and they figured out ways to do that. Grocery stores are also open. A lot of grocery stores that didn't have access to like the logistics are now beginning to do that, and you're able to have your groceries delivered to your apartment. Even your mom and pop corner store are now looking for people that they can run an errand to, say, hey, someone just called for XYZ items, can you deliver it next door? So people are getting innovative, and you'll find a shift towards technology, and that whole logistics process will be handled by technology as well.
Yes. This just reminds me of one of the restaurants we go to in London. Ordinarily, when you go there and you're unable to finish your food, they wouldn't even allow you to take the food out. You know what I mean? They insist. The other day, my daughter was telling me they're now on Deliveroo. I mean, so they pivoted because they realized there's some quasi lockdown in London. People can't come to the restaurants anymore. So now, they have to deliver. Well, for them to stay in business, they need to deliver. Acha, talking about interventions, what can the government do to up their interventions? Because you made a point around the government not doing enough. That there's a demand of about 9%, and the government's coming up with 1%. How do you what the gap? There's the gap.
Yeah. I mean, it has to be through partners, right? So there's a lot of talk about how can the development partners come and help. The African finance ministers have already requested $100 billion to $150 billion package, right? And that's sort of, in some ways, some of it is supported by the World Bank and the IMF. Just to give you a sense, in 2020 alone, Africa was supposed to pay, across all of our countries, $44 billion to service our debt, whether it's multilateral debt, bilateral debt, private debt. Our governments were going to pay $44 billion to service debt across Africa this year. So the big request is to say, can that be not waived, but can you put a moratorium so we actually don't have to pay that money out the window this year and maybe for next year? So the big request is a moratorium on debt repayment for the next 2 years, right? Now the question is that going to be approved? Is that not going to be approved? Now, let's assume that it's approved, right? And the multilateral, bilateral partners say, okay, fine, don't pay the debt. Now the question is, what do the countries do with that money, right? Do you take that money? And they've also gone and issued Eurobonds, right? So they've gone and gotten some private debt. Do you take that money to go and pay off a private debt? Well, that's not really helping your economy, right? So you also need to negotiate with the private debt holders to say, can you also find a way to negotiate there? But then if you had that money, how do you pump it back into the economy, right? So if, for example, we decide to pay off our debt to the private sector in Nigeria, right? How do you make sure that private sector takes that money, not to pocket it, but to use it to pay salaries for the employees for the next few months and make sure they don't fire the employees? So it's actually not straightforward how to go about this. But the big request is we're going to need a big package, right? There's also a request to say, look, how can we as Africa go to China and say, China, in some ways you created this. What role can you do to help us solve it, right? So there are a number of these conversations going on. And hopefully the on this week, the World Bank IMF are meeting. Hopefully we're going to hear something this week, but there's a lot of pressure, at least on the debt side, to make sure there's some resolution there.
Talking about China creating this, that's been a sensitive spot for me all week. But I think I don't want to go into the sensitivities around China creating this and China not being held responsible for creating this, and China wanting to be exempt from creating this, and all sorts of things. But I will come back to that. One of the effects of the pandemic, the lockdown, is that apparently there's flexibility to have quality family time. So you can work from home, you can be with your loved ones, the kids, and all that. So there's a flexibility around that, working from home. But there's also something else. The reports are saying there'll be increase in domestic violence, there'll be in domestic abuse. So it brings me to mental health. So I don't know, what are your thoughts around supporting, helping, because there'll be a lot of all this going on?
It's a tough time, right? Even though you say staying at home, for some people it might be a pleasure, for some people it's actually a pain, literally a physical pain, not just an emotional pain. And there's so many other emotions that are going on. There's the frustration of, you don't know what's happening, what's going on. There's the uncertainty. How long will this last? What does it mean for me? People feel just stressed, in a word. I think the first thing is people need to explore their emotions. I think us Africans, we're not good at really spending time and saying, actually, how do I feel? And related to that, why do I feel the way I feel? So I think we all need to, we do have time, right? And we're at home. We all need to be going on these personal, emotional exploration journeys, just to understand the root cause. And quite often you might find that, you also need to dimension it, because some of the things we get all worked up about, actually, they're not even real. For example, fear, right? Ask yourself, what are you really scared of? And is it actually that? What are the chances it's going to happen? And even if it does happen, what can I do about it? And is the outcome as bad as I expected it to be? And, these are some of the things we're going to have to do individually to be able to maintain our sort of mental, emotional balance or well-being, because not everybody, in terms of, psychologists and psychiatrists, the per capita, the number we have in Nigeria per capita is like atrocious. I can't remember the numbers, but when I found out, I was literally floored, but in a negative way. So we're going to have to do some self-help. You also spoke about domestic violence. That is very, very real. And unfortunately, people don't have the physical space to escape. Talk less of the mental space. But I was on a call the other day when I was talking to somebody who's been trained in counseling, and saying that, it's important as best as possible to, where you can, do put some space. When the person's in the living room, go into the bedroom, etc., just to protect yourself as best as you can physically. And then obviously we've spoken about emotional, mental. I'll leave it for there.
Super. I mean, I'd like comments from regarding, because it's a big thing. Mental health. It's a big thing.
And it's anxiety, panic attacks, and it's feelings. Some people are lonely. There's so much going out there, and I think the isolation has even made this a bit worse. I guess for introverts, it might be working, but there's some people who are used to being up and about, and having to just sit still and be in a place for a period of time there's just so much going on. And with small SMEs in particular, and MSMEs, You know, it's we've encouraged them to. We've also found that a lot of people want to help in a little way, but sometimes they're a bit intimidated by, you know, what the private sector is doing and all the billions flying around. And, you know, it's been quite touching to see a few people who realize that I can do something. It doesn't matter how little it is, you know, so it's how do people deal with that feeling of helplessness? This is happening around me, but how can I support in my own way? You know, it might be a small business or a little person, or, you know, in the grand scheme of things, it's good to just know how to help people cope and deal with that. And I know there are several helplines, at least a few, quite a lot of churches and foundations have that. So it'd be good to, I don't know.
Ijeoma, what's going on in your side of town with respect to mental health and finding help and all that?
So, you know, before the whole breakout, mental health was a huge topic, just with the impact of social media and people's psyche. So mental health had gained the forefront because there are a lot of stories with teenagers and older people, you know, having mental health issues. So now the pandemic has sort of exacerbated that, right? So everything Sanyade and Omoyemi said, this is a time where we really have to just stop, take a beat, and just take a step back and understand what's really going on and how that's impacting us as individuals, right? We are isolated, but we're in isolation, but we're not isolated. I think Yemi, you had said that. We're in isolation, but not isolated. One thing about mental health is that if you're able to boost your morale through connectedness, if you're able to boost your morale through helping others, if you're able to boost your morale through being able to contribute somewhere, somehow, it tends to help the way you see yourself. It tends to help the way you think. It fills you with positive attitude. So in a time where, you know, the media is all doom and gloom, newspapers are all doom and gloom, everything you see on social media is doom and gloom. This is a time where you switch off all of that noise, all those triggers that tend to make you spiral and want you to think that there's nothing you can do. That's not true. There's so much that you can do. And healing starts with you as an individual. As much as people are talking about, you know, economic plans to roll out, how things are going to change and pivot, nothing changes if you're not healthy. If you as an individual, or you as a small business owner, or you as a head of a company is not healthy and able to then lead other people to do what you need them to do, nothing changes. So take care of yourself first. So in New York, the isolation is real, but people, there's a connectedness. And there's a story I want to share. We all know how strained the hospitals have been. Elmhurst Hospital in Queens has been one of the most challenged hospitals because due to lack of equipment, due to lack of staff, it's just been challenging for them. So at 7 p.m. every day, New Yorkers come out, well, stick their heads out of their windows and they're screaming, clapping. You hear sirens, ambulance sirens, police sirens, just like jeering. It's a show of solidarity to say, we are here for one another. And it goes on for 5 minutes. It's amazing to just listen to, because you then know that even in isolation, people still want to reach out and help. So it's very important that you start with that level of connectedness. Reach out to people, right? Call somebody. If you're religiously inclined, do pray, but this is not a time for you to withdraw and be within yourself. Now more than ever is a time for you to connect. And I think that would help with some of the mental health challenges that we see.
You know, at some point, thank you very much. At some point, big companies and small companies started, there was a buzzword, and I think it still goes on now, being mindfulness.
Yes.
You know, there's, you know, and they incorporated it into strategy, into business, and big businesses also had in their campuses, offices, they had this sites where they reserved to be mindful. So there are two things here. Acha, I want you to talk about mindfulness from your corporation, but also you said something about stop and think. I mean, it sounds simple, but how does one stop and think about what? You know, when you say stop and think, your mind is racing. Your mind is racing. Anxiety, uncertainty, the future, darkness, and then stop and think. You don't even have the presence of mind to stop and think.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to jump in. So one on, I think having a number of conversations, one on gender-based violence, it is real, right? In the first week of the lockdown, the South Africa, there's a mobile number you call for gender-based violence. They got 87,000 calls in the first week of the lockdown. 87,000, right? It's a big deal. So it's, take it very seriously. And so it's something, and then because people are at home and these things happen, right? So again, it's what kind of programs, enforcement your governments put in place to help support people who are dealing with this, right? On the mental health, big companies, we have it every day. Actually, we have a mindfulness session for everybody at the firm. You can dial in and do it. So I think some of these things, the value, by the way, of being offline or of being at home is everybody can connect from wherever in the world, right? So I also think part of the value here is anybody who's dealing with something like that, there's a lot of resources globally that you can now tap into, right? Because a number of people are trying to make those resources available. So I'll just encourage everybody to first be mindful of their own state, understand the state they're in, understand if they need help. I think as Africans, we're not always very forthcoming when it comes to recognizing and accepting that we need help. But then, then explore. There are a lot of opportunities and a lot of people who are willing to help now globally. Right? You can sit at home and have a session with somebody who's anywhere in the world, right? So really, take advantage of those opportunities.
Yeah. How about the stop and think? Also with respect to being mindful, or would you say exercise works? Creating the dopamine, feel good hormones those help as well.
No, absolutely. I mean, I've been stranded at home. I've been locked down for proper lockdown, not you guys' lockdown where you can still walk outside the house, right? I was saying, these guys, in South Africa, the minister of police said, if you want to walk your dog in your house. If you want to run in your house. That's a lockdown. We're only allowed to leave the house to go shopping or to go to the hospital. That's it, right? So I've been on proper lockdown. I've made sure I continue to exercise a couple of times a week, right? So it's not easy, but I think you have to find what the right outlet is for you, right? And try to make sure you continue with that.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much for that. We're going to open it shortly to Q&A from the audience.
Maybe before we do that, there are loads of young people listening, and thinking about the future as well. So I don't know if you, as mentors, want to say one or two things before we open up for questions, or maybe leave it till after. Or
no, and then round up with something.
Okay, well, I'll start. I think related to what we've just been talking about, I think it's important to actually silence the noise. You're talking about young people. There's just so much information out there, social media, WhatsApp, etc. And it really does not help one move forward. I think now more than ever, one needs to, harness their creative energies and the ability to innovate. And negative energy does not help that. So it's just to be very careful about what they're paying attention to.
I'm happy to build on that. I think I would say two things. One is, this thing is only going to get resolved if we social distance, right? So my big push for all of us around the world is, please practice social distancing. That's the only way we're going to really flatten the curve, right? Let's look at ourselves. This is a big deal, right? It's going to affect us all. It's going to be the biggest crisis we've all seen ever in our lives, right? So I think we don't want to be doom and gloomy, but the reality, it's a big deal. It's a big crisis. Let's take it very seriously. The way to get it under control, as fast as possible, is if we all abide by what the government has put in place and we all practice social distancing. Then the final thing I'll say is, then again, as we think about all of that, there are challenges to the businesses, of course, but there are definitely opportunities. So, make sure you put an opportunity hat on, right? As I know Nigerians know how to do so well as you think about this, right? And really look for opportunities in the midst of this crisis.
Thank you.
I agree with what Acha and Sanyade said, and I will just add to that, especially with young people. Young people are they're very technology advanced. They do a lot with technology, and now is the time, I feel, to get creative. There's this individual called Avi Schiffman. I don't know if any of you have heard of him, but he's 16 years old, and he's based in the US, and he's a gamer. All he does is play computer games, and he codes the games. And that's pretty much every other 16, 17, 18-year-old out there. But what Avi has done over the past 2-3 weeks was build a website that has a database where at any point in time, you can see the impact of COVID across each country all over the world. So you could go in, you type Nigeria, you see the number of tested people who are sick, and all of that. So his site just recently had over 350 million visited. This is a 16-year-old that didn't even need to do this, but he kept asking himself, what would I do to just make this better for the next person? I'm at home not doing much, homeschooling, and that was what he decided to do. So I think, silencing the noise is fantastic, but also once you've done that, take the time to understand, how do I use my skills? What can I do to make somebody else's life better? How can I be of service? And with technology, there's so many ways we can tap into that.
Ijeoma, you're encouraging us to go and play Fortnite, right? That's what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly.
So, okay, fantastic. Thank you. So I guess that's our call to action for today. Silence the noise and find out how you can contribute in your own way. Feed Ikoyi is something that was launched by Adeju Thompson. He's a designer, Lagos-based program, and it was born out of he lives on Reeve Road, and he just said to himself, even before starting Feed Ikoyi, he'd reached out to us to produce some masks from his fabrics that he had. I'm talking about 400 yards of fabric, which is a lot for a designer. And he said, you know what, I want to donate this to the cause because, people are dying, and I know Nigeria, there's so many people, there's something we should be able to do. And that was so touching. And from there, he's moved on to start this initiative where it's important, he thinks it's important to, and his model is quite interesting. So his model is to pay the women who normally sell food in Ikoyi to make food for construction workers and people who hang around the neighborhood so they can eat for free. So not only is he feeding the people, but he's keeping commerce going. So the women bringing an outside supplier to bring food, it's not a drive-by in a fancy car and just dishing out food to people. These are the local women who normally cook. If we give you X amount of money, then you can feed 100 people for free today or 200 people for free. And to me, that's a good example of what can I do? What can I do now? In addition to the story of course, and I'm looking forward to seeing more initiatives like that. So quickly going into Q&A, Justin Almotayo is asking, how does the government address seeing an increase in crime as a result of unemployment? African economies are operating in a very different environment to developed economies. To what extent do you think African governments should have considered how the lockdown is implemented? Okay, they're 3 questions, so we can break it down. And how long can the African economy really survive a lockdown for?
Sure. I'm happy to take that because this is something we've been really reflecting on, and a lot of people are talking about it, right? And it's not an easy decision. So the way our governments have thought about it, they said, look, the measures on one dimension, it goes from no restrictions, wear masks. Then remember there were school closures of religious gatherings. Then there were curfews. Then there was sort of a partial lockdown, which you have in some countries have a full lockdown, right? So we've been tracking this. Just to give you a sense, about 15% of Africans are under a national lockdown, like in South Africa. About 40% of Africans are in a partial lockdown, like you guys have in Nigeria. And then there's still sort of 20% No, that's a partial lockdown in a few cities, right? So Lagos, Ogun, and Abuja, right? You have partial lockdowns there. And then, 20% of
Actually,
yes.
for the record, we don't feel like we're under partial lockdown. We feel very
Okay.
locked down. Just so you know.
Just so, I don't feel like you do either.
The thing is paining us. It's paining us, please, I beg.
But the point is, so that's one dimension. At the end of the day, what the government is what we're trying to address is, what's this flattening the curve? It's, we have a capacity in our healthcare system to manage critical situations. When people get sick and have to go to a hospital, we want to make sure that no more people than we can manage actually become that sick, right? Because if not, then it overflows our hospitals and you have those issues. Now, who gets mostly affected by this? You'll argue, typically they'll argue, is it older people or people with a pre-existing condition, right? So there's the whole thinking, which is to say, instead of looking at just the dimension of the lockdowns, look at another dimension, which is, on one hand, if you could isolate the most critical people who could accept the older people and folks with prior conditions, and make sure they don't get it, and let the rest of us get it. And if you get it, most of us won't be critical, won't go to the hospital. You can keep the economy open, right, and manage it. So that's on one extreme. The other extreme is a national lockdown. So to give you a sense, a national lockdown takes away about 80 to 90% of the economy, right, because that's locked. But it reduces the number of cases you have, right? The situation where you just sort of make sure people who could be in critical care don't get it, that you basically keep the economy open, so you're reducing the economy only by like 5%. You're getting a lot more cases, right? Now you could argue we're younger in Africa, so you won't get that many critical cases, and there's everything in between. So really thinking through, how do you manage that? Our governments are focused on one dimension, right? And what we're encouraging them is to focus on both. Like somebody said, look, you could have a 10% chance of dying of corona or 100% chance of dying of hunger. What will you choose? Right. And so we need to balance both. And there's a lot of discussion going in there. We're running numbers to see what that means. How do we find the right balance? And I think what we're going to find is more and more countries are going to start thinking about both dimensions, because you're seeing a lot of social unrest already, some social unrest already. And you're seeing people saying 40% of people, if they don't work, they're not going to eat, right? So, if you lock it down, what happens to them? Anyhow, so sorry, I went on for a bit, but that's a bit the challenge that folks are dealing with.
I think what we've found is that, there's something that we in Africa do all too often. There's a problem. Instead of trying to understand the underlying issues and coming up with a solution that meets our own needs, our own idiosyncrasies today, we look at what somebody else has done somewhere else and try and adopt it wholesale. This is another example of where it doesn't work. The reality is we know that the structure of our economy is different. People need to work to eat. If they can't work, they still need to eat. How are you going to feed them? So in Lagos State, for example, I know initially they were trying to put food in different schools, etc., and they stopped it because it was rowdy. What's that about? Find a different solution. Maybe you need more school locations. Maybe you need to get civil society involved. Because the security concerns that security issues people have been facing over the last few days, it's not funny. And if it's not addressed, to be honest, there's only one direction it's going to go. So we have to think of our own solutions very quickly before we end up with unintended consequences.
I do agree with you. I think, being in the US, I jokingly say that our president here acts like an African president, and you'll find that Trevor Noah also agrees with me. His way of thinking is just beyond. But luckily, we have governors who run states, and they then look at their states and how their states are structured, and come up with ways to just ensure that we're able to manage the spread of this pandemic. So it could be a partial lockdown, it could be a total lockdown. But with New York, where I'm based, they decided upfront that essential services was very important. What are the essential services? People still need healthcare. Even those who are not affected by COVID-19 still need healthcare. There are people with all sorts of other issues going on right now, and they need medical attention. People need to eat. So grocery stores are seen as essential services. But these grocery stores are also practicing safe distancing as best as they can. So when I go pick up my groceries, if I don't order online, I have to stand at least 6 feet away from the teller before I can pay. They're wiping down the producers. They're doing so many things to keep you safe, but they've recognized that essential services is important. So to just say a total lockdown, I don't see how that's going to work in a country like Nigeria or any other African country at that. So I do 100% agree with what you're saying on this.
So a gentleman did a paper, and I just want to read from what he said. He says, the cost of not having people at work for 30 days is costing the Nigerian economy in excess of 600 billion per month at the low end. The true cost is many times higher. That's what we're going through.
But I think let me jump in here and play devil's advocate just a little bit, right? And it's sort of balancing how economies over time can probably, it might take time, can be restored, but human lives. So maybe, is there a way to balance that you're trying to keep people alive, you know, versus the economy, you know, just to, so what do we,
yeah.
what do we do?
So because the challenge is, you know, let's say you don't do the lockdown, right? And these cases go out of control, right? You know, some people say, well, malaria kills more people in Africa. Yeah, probably, that's true. But however, it's not all at once in 100 days, right? You're gonna have, I don't know if you saw what's happening in Ecuador, right? You'll have corpses all over the place. And, you know, and you don't want to have that on your hands either, right? So it's really, I think it's easy to sit down and say, yes, we should have done this, it's actually not an easy decision. I think everybody recognizes that lockdowns, national lockdowns, you know, have the most severe impact on the economy, and an economy where a lot of people, you know, live sort of, you know, hand to mouth, that is not sustainable. And now thinking through then what is right, we think what you need to do is really use a data-driven approach to understand what is the right model, right, to make sure you so what we call save lives and protect livelihoods. You need to do both at the same time.
So let's go to Regine and Koma. Thanks for sharing with us. With the disruption of global supply chains, does this pandemic offer a viable opportunity for the Made in Africa brand and to drive the AfCFTA agenda, or is this a Pan-Africanist dream with no real probability amidst this challenge?
I'm going to take a stab at that, and I'm going to divide the question into two. There's the Made in Africa, and then there's the Africa Free Trade Zone thing. They're two very different things to my mind. Let's take Nigeria. With where oil prices are, you know, the new deal that was just struck yesterday, et cetera, we know that the government income is going to be much less than they had initially hoped. We know that there's going to be a lot of pressure on our foreign exchange rate, and we're already seeing it at the parallel market as of today is about 410. You know, officially, they've gone from that 300. You know, we had that, the multi-level exchange rate. They've tried to harmonize that, but then even the parallel rate, it's weaker. And, you know, as much as we might not like to talk about it or accept it, we expect to see continued pressure on the foreign exchange rate, certainly in the short to medium term. What that means is imported goods are going to be more expensive. And on the flip side, you know, Acha at the start was talking about unemployment rates. That speaks to disposable income as well. So all that for me, I think it's pointing to the people buying more locally produced products. You know, that just has to be the way it's going to go forward. Now, on the Africa Free Trade Zone, that's a whole another story. I think there are other issues. If you remember, as at last summer, for quite a bit of time after, we were talking about Nigerians' borders being shut. So, you know, when it comes to free trade, you know, we need to address a whole lot of other issues, not just whether or not our products are attractive. And having said that, yes, there's going to be more demand for locally produced goods, but we also need to ensure that we keep, because the trajectory has been improving quality. We need to continue on that trajectory. And they also need to make sure that they're operating as efficiently as possible so prices don't keep going up, because affordability will be a key concern coming out of the pandemic.
I would add, I would say, I actually think one of the silver linings coming out of this, I think you're going to see a much more united continent, right? I think we're going to do a lot more to speak as one voice as Africa, because we realize, if one of us has it, everybody has it. I'm part of this group that's trying to, for example, figure out how we can get supplies into the continent, right? And every country is trying to buy some ventilators, and that doesn't work because they're all being squeezed out of the market. So the idea is, how do you pull all of that together, have one big request and one big, command order, right, on negotiate with the Chinese to make sure they prioritize us. So I think what's going to come out of that. So that's when you're going to see a lot more, hopefully a lot more united Africa, right? Two is, some of these supply chains are going to have to be local, right? We cannot continue to rely on China or other places. Now, for many of our, as you know, they've banned many exports of pharmaceutical products, and we can't even manufacture them on the continent. So for some of these products, I think you're going to see a lot more manufacturing happening on the continent. And so I think there's then an opportunity to say, who should manufacture what for the continent, right? It doesn't make sense for every single country now to go and say, let's build up, pharmaceutical manufacturing plants. So hopefully there'll be a conversation to say, what should Nigeria manufacture for the continent? What should Ghana manufacture? What should Kenya do, right? And then the answer may be not just for the continent, but the rest of the world, right? But to Sanyade's point, for that to happen, how do you make sure, you're doing it, the productivity levels are right, and that you can actually be globally competitive, right? But I think there's a silver lining if we do things right, that this helps us, helps reinforce AFCTA, helps us really think more as one big African continent, and help us do a lot more local manufacturing.
Thank you very much. Lydia, thanks for this beautiful opportunity. For a brand that was planning to enter the market soon, do you think this season will have a negative effect on the startup?
It depends on what the person's doing. What sort of brand?
It depends on what?
It depends on what the person's doing. Okay, what sort of brand?
Let's say fashion, for example.
Yeah, as I said, for me, season is, if we're talking about the next 2 weeks, absolutely not. I don't think now's a good time. But if we're talking about the next few months, what we've just been saying is we expect to see more opportunities for local companies. So absolutely, that would be a good time. Once we start coming out of this funk we find ourselves in.
Great. I'll just add to that for any brand trying to enter the market now, also pause and look at what's going on and understand how that's going to change the consumers you're targeting, because consumer behavior is going to change. The way we consume is going to change as well, because the disposable income that we had previously is not going to be there for a lot of people as the economy is just trying to get back to the previous health status that they had. So rather than just rush to launch, stop and think and see where you can best pivot to take advantage of whatever opportunities are out there. So I'm not saying don't launch your business, but just stop, reassess, and see if you need to pivot.
Okay, thank you.
So Acha needs to run off, but before he runs off and rounds up, I mean, just one question directly at you, so you can, because I know you need to run off for another call. So Marianne is asking, what should businesses expect in terms of transactions and patronage when eventually the countries reopen? Will people be willing to spend, or should businesses anticipate that consumers will be cautious with spending?
I think it's a great question, and honestly, I think it depends. It also depends on the type of business you're in, right? So the question also depends on how things unfold, right? If people are saying, look, if there's a resurgence in China and people feel like this may calm down, but it may come back again, they may actually want to hold on to the cash and not spend, right? I think it's very clear that there's certain sectors where people are just going to have to spend money, right? People are going to have to spend money in the whole pharmaceutical sector, like I said, in the whole telecom sector, like I said. So the sectors like that where people have to spend money. But I would really, if I were you, just try to understand the signs, right? How long is this crisis likely going to last? What are people thinking about how this is going to unfold in the future, right? Are we done with the crisis, or may there be another one? I would then try to reflect on, again, to Ijeoma's point, what are consumer behaviors likely going to change? And based on that, what kind of businesses will they spend money on? And what won't they spend money on? We just did a survey in Nigeria of consumers in Nigeria and in South Africa. And in Nigeria, 65% of consumers told us now they're saving the money, right? They're not spending because they just never know, right? We're waiting to see, doing this survey again 3 months from now and see how people think about it. So I think it depends on your business. But again, again, my last point is, the only way for this to get resolved very quickly is for us to all observe social distancing and flatten the curve. So that's my last message to all of you. I'm sorry I have to run, but thanks again, guys, for the invitation.
Thank you, Acha. Thank you very much. We'll talk offline. Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Take care. Be safe, everybody.
Be safe. So I think we have. Hello, for a fashion business owner, what's the best comeback to business advice after the pandemic in order to remain in business? Dish out the existing or project new designs. So should I take that?
Sure.
I think the most important thing is to rely on what you have, like the existing stock for now. Currently, if you produce some work and you've designed, and not only that, you've gone into full manufacturing and you are ready to sell, the most important thing for now is to focus on how to sell that before you go straight into designing something that's completely new. The future for me is going to be, we have to think about less waste and how we're going to use as much of what we have now as possible. That economy, the economy of producing more and more, I think is completely dying out. And now people need to figure out how to produce to satisfy or to meet the current supply that's out there. So my advice would be, it's great, but let's figure out how we want to sell the existing collection that you produce, that you're already marketing and that's already in distribution pre-pandemic. That's what I would say.
I'll just add to that and say, I think this is going to change fast fashion. The way previously people, consumed fashion in such a relatively high speed pace. And it was all about that instant gratification. I want it now, now, now. This isolation or the pandemic and the effects of it is making us realize that there's so many things that we put a lot of emphasis on that we wanted now that we no longer need. And that realization is struck to some people, to some others, they've realized it from time. So, as a fashion brand, I wholeheartedly agree is you have to assess your current stock, your current inventory, and look for new customers. Now is your opportunity to approach those people who weren't typically the fast fashion type of folks. Approach them, look for ways to target them, because as much as people are saving money for the unknown, there is still an appetite to understand what's still going on in the market. Is this something that interests me? Do I want to participate in it? So build up that relationship. And building up the relationship shouldn't be transactional. It shouldn't be about, oh, I have this product, you have to come buy. Use that as an opportunity to build a relationship and connectedness with your target consumer base so that when this is over, you've built trust with them and you're then able to position your products or services for sale.
Definitely. And just to add a few tips, offer discounts where you need to, this is probably the time where you need to think about delivery service, make sure your e-commerce platform is up and running or your social selling skills are up and good, discount codes. The whole idea is I'm sitting on this stock and I need to sell them. The whole idea shouldn't be, how do I design a new collection because I want to keep myself, fresh. And I say that despite, us being a platform that showcases the Lagos Fashion Week, and we always urge you to produce new collections. But that was, it's important that we focus on what you have to and how you can sell it before we encourage you to design a new collection and to put it out there, because everything as we know it is about to change or has changed. And the focus right now should be, the people you work with, why you're producing and what you're producing and how it benefits everyone within the ecosystem. So sorry, I'm trying to rush through so that we don't keep you too long, Sanyade and Ijeoma. This lockdown has affected the financial target of the startup I work with, an ad agency, and we keep trying to find out how we can at least do halfway of the figure, because the pandemic has brought us home and no work is really coming. How can we still be a step ahead after it's all over? Does anyone want to take that? an advertising agency, they probably had a target and it's affected their target. So how can they stay ahead of the curve once this is all over?
That's
to be honest. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
All right. The way I've seen this pandemic thing is almost like somebody's taken a pack of cards, thrown it all up in the air. It's still in the air until it comes down. We really don't know how everything's going to land. So there's some things that is going to be difficult to plan for. But what I think would be helpful is to actually dimension the issues. They're the known knowns, right? There are certain things about your business, about your economy that you know is going to happen, whatever. So Nigeria, we know government revenue is going to be lower. We know there'll be a global recession. You know what I mean? Dimension that and make concrete plans based on the known knowns. And then there are the known unknowns. For example, how long is this whole lockdown going to last? We don't know. Will there be a recession? You know, will we, having dealt with the first wave of coronavirus, will it reoccur? We don't know. What you can do for those is some sort of scenario planning and say, depending on what happens, this is the approach I'm going to take. And the last one are the unknown unknowns. If you think about it, as we're all coming into 2020, who would have thought that 3 months later we'll all be sitting at home? No one. You just could not plan for it. So it's really try and dimension the issues. Think about what you can control and let go of what you can't control.
Thank you very much.
I'll just add one thing to that. So with the scenario planning, you know, realize that you're not the only one in this position. Every business is hit in some way. Some are able to weather it more than others. So as part of your scenario planning, you should look into also collaboration. Where can I possibly collaborate with other businesses to still be able to sustain a viable business over time? At the end of the day, I believe we shouldn't be looking at it as competition now. It's where can we pull resources together to ensure that as a business, we're still viable. So collaboration is really key in your scenario planning because there will be synergies that you can have there that both businesses will be able to benefit from.
Yeah, thank you very much. And the 3 C's for me of the season: collaboration, co-creation, community. The 3 C's, the things that, you know, it's a model that we're, you know, it's something we've always believed in, but more than ever before, that we're taking with us into the next season. Co-creation, collaboration, community. Reach out and let's do as much as we can with as many people as we can, supporting us through the process, because the me economy is dead, frankly speaking. So we have to think beyond that, you know, oh, you know, am I going this way? It's how can what I do benefit even more people, and how can we all work together to be able to achieve that vision or that goal goes from being a mono-vision to, you know, to benefiting a bit more people. It might go a long way. So I think the other questions are fashion related, and I'm tempted to say, should we take this on our Instagram page so that we can let our guests go off because they're super busy. So we have one from Yemi Scott and on face-to-face business models.
You want to answer this one?
Okay.
No, this one, as a designer. As
a designer who recently moved back to Lagos and has a fashion brand that sold in several stores in the US, what is Nigeria doing to increase supply of great retail stores with the likes of Alara and Temple Muse? How do you find stores? Do fashion showrooms exist for young designers who are looking to sell to more stores locally?
That's you. Question.
Another question, what is Nigeria doing to increase supply? I like the reference to the stores as well. Temple Muse and Alara are privately, they're owned by individuals who, you know, who decided to invest in that kind of business. So I think it's something that we're hoping more people see it as a viable opportunity to open retail stores, even though everywhere else in the world, people are beginning to think that it's more important to build a direct-to-consumer database where you can sell to your customers directly. And of course, not trying to take out the middleman or the Temple Muses and the Alaras of this world, but to encourage you to probably try to do both. In 2020, we have some people who just, all they do is sell from their Instagram pages. They don't even have stores, they don't have anything. They just they built a following there. They sell everything online. So I think the future, in the absence of having a lot of Temple Muses and Alaras, while the next, hopefully the next investor working on a project like that, and we can explore the means. There's Aviver. Aviver is an e-commerce store. There's so many people. I am what's it called? Asianas Retail. They have one at the mall. There's 41 Looks. I think they're in Abuja, and they have a store in Lagos. So there are different people that do multi-retail and offer that sort of service for designers and brands. And I know there are conversations around you want it to be high street or luxury brands, but that's a completely different conversation for another day. But in the meantime, please reach out to us, send an email, send us a DM, and we can answer all your other questions. But we have to let our guests go now. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us.
Thank you for having us. I think this was very important, nice conversation to have as well, and I hope everybody got something out of it.
Yeah, well, I think maybe we can wait for Sanyade to come back. Okay. If maybe there's a disruption on the internet or.
No, she's there. I think maybe.
Okay, maybe.
Video have to she has to turn off.
Joe, what time is it now in America?
Oh, we're 5 hours behind, so it's almost 2:30.
Okay.
Wow, it's the middle of your work day. Thank you.
Yeah.
You're working from home.
Yes, I'm working from home, and it's taken some adjusting to, but it's been okay so far. So I'm grateful. You know.
And I gather now's the time to buy New York stocks.
Perhaps. Perhaps.
We're waiting for you to get back so we can round up. Hello?
Maybe it's her connection, perhaps?
Connection, I think. Is
yeah.
So thank you so much. From Lisa, thank you. Fantastic. I hung onto every word. John, I did it so much.
Keeping it real for me, but they'll turn the generator on in a minute. Yep, there you go. Yep, I'm back.
Are you back?
Are you back?
I'm back. Can you?
Yes, we can hear you. I think it's
can you hear me?
Glitching a bit, just
yeah.
a little bit.
We just wanted you to come back so we can round up to say thank you very much for joining me. She's gone away.
Okay, yeah. Ijeoma, we'll let you go off.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good one. Bye.
Everyone. Oh, Sanyade's going off. We'll just wait for
yeah.
her to come.
Hello, Sanyade.
Hi. Sorry. NEPA is just keeping it real, and you know what that means. So I'm using my phone now.
I think good. Well, we're just rounding up.
No problem.
I'm thankful for the opportunity to be able to come here and sit next to the lady of fashion, and to share the platform with you very important people of the world. Acha in South Africa, Ijeoma in New York, and Sanyade in Nigeria. Thank you very much.
Thank you so
much.
Thanks, guys.
Take care, everyone.
Will do. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.